Ramses was born into a world of sand, stone. The Egyptian sun was a god, casting brilliant golden light over the land. The Great Nile River ran like a silver thread through the desert. He was a prince, the son of Pharaoh Ramesses III, living in a palace of immense size and splendor in Memphis. From his earliest days, he learned the ways of power. He trained to ride a chariot, feeling the wind rush past as the wheels thundered. He learned to draw a bowstring back to his ear, his eye fixed on a distant target. He spent his youth surrounded by the rituals of kingship. He listened to the deep voices of priests chanting in the temples, their words echoing in columned halls. He watched his father dispense justice and receive emissaries from foreign lands. The palace felt vast and alive, a golden cage of power and duty. At night, oil lamps cast flickering shadows on painted walls. Young Ramses felt a fire in his heart, a driving ambition to surpass his father and all pharaohs before. When his father, Seti I, completed his journey to the afterlife, the time came for Ramses to take his rightful place. The coronation was a spectacle of overwhelming sound and dazzling light. In the great temple at Thebes, priests in white linen robes chanted hymns that soared to the high ceilings, their voices a wave of devotion. The noblemen and courtiers, dressed in their finest regalia, cheered until the very stones seemed to vibrate. Ramses stood before them, a powerful figure upon whom all hopes rested. He felt the immense weight of the blue crown as it was placed upon his head. His hands closed around the cool, symbolic shape of the crook, then the flail. He stood in a hall that shimmered with gold, decorations on the pillars, and the jewelry that adorned his court. Outside the temple walls, Memphis celebrated, streets alive with music and feasting. Far to the south, Thebes, with its 100 gates, shone on the eastern bank of the Nile. People from all corners brought gifts and tributes. Grand barges with brightly colored sails moved slowly along the river, part of a majestic procession asserting dominion over the waters and over the land. He made a solemn vow to the gods and to his people to protect Egypt from all its enemies. Ramses did not rest on ceremony. He dove into the work of visible rule. He rode from his palace in a magnificent chariot, banners flying, visited the great temples, and inspected the work of his governors. He met the common people, listened to farmers about the harvest, and to builders shaping stone for his monuments. He showed he was not a distant deity, but a present, powerful shepherd for his flock. At night, under 1,000,000 stars in the clear desert sky, he stood on a palace balcony and contemplated the path ahead. He believed the gods had chosen him, investing him with divine power. In the quiet evening, he made silent promises. He promised bountiful crops, a peaceful, orderly kingdom, and above all, to build temples and monuments that would honor them for all eternity. His reign would be an offering, a testament to their glory and his own. But the promise of peace was not easily kept. A formidable enemy, the Hittite Empire, gathered its forces in the north, threatening Egypt's borders and its influence in the Levant. Ramses, the warrior king, could not ignore this challenge. He led his vast army of chariots and foot soldiers north to confront them at a strategic city called Kadesh. The battlefield was a wide, dry plain that shimmered under the relentless heat of the Syrian sun. As the two armies approached each other, a thick cloud of dust rose from the earth, a suffocating brown wall that obscured the horizon. The ground trembled as thousands of chariots raced across the plain, their wheels churning the soil. The air filled with the sounds of war. Horses, their eyes wide with panic, snorted and reared as their drivers urged them forward. Soldiers, their faces grim, braced themselves behind brightly painted shields and held their long spears ready. Ramses himself rode at the very front of his division, a magnificent and terrifying sight. His armor, inlaid with gold, shone like a second sun. He held his bow firmly, shouting commands and encouragement to his men, his voice rising above the din of battle. The clash was a storm of noise and violence. Arrows rained down in deadly swarms. Men screamed as they fell in the swirling dust, and the clash of bronze against bronze was a deafening, rhythmic clang. At a critical moment in the battle, a surprise Hittite chariot charge shattered the cohesion of the Egyptian advance. Ramses found himself cut off, his personal guard scattered, and his division in retreat. He was suddenly and terrifyingly alone, surrounded by a sea of enemy chariots closing in for the kill. Yet, in this moment of ultimate peril, he showed no trace of fear. He called upon the god Amun for strength, and with a great cry, he single-handedly charged forward. His chariot became a weapon of destruction, tearing through the enemy lines like a divine storm. He was a god of war made manifest on the battlefield. The astonishing sight of their king, alone and unbroken, struck the hearts of his retreating soldiers. Inspired by his impossible bravery, they rallied. The Hittite attack faltered. In the end, the brutal fighting ceased, with both exhausted armies holding the field. Ramses was not only a warrior who conquered men, he was a master builder who conquered stone. He possessed an insatiable love for monumental architecture, a passion for shaping temples and statues on a scale never before seen. Following the Battle of Kadesh, he initiated enormous building projects across the entire length of his kingdom, Nile Delta to the southern frontier of Nubia. He commanded that huge blocks of sandstone, granite, be cut from the quarries by armies of laborers. These colossal stones were then moved with immense effort, loaded onto barges, transported along the lifeblood of the Nile. The work at Abu Simbel in the deep south was his most audacious and breathtaking project. Here, his workers did not build a temple, but carved one directly from the living rock of a mountain cliff. 4 gigantic seated statues of Ramses, each over 60 feet tall, sculpted into the facade, their impassive faces looking out over the river and into the desert for all time. Inside the mountain, a long hall supported by statues of the king led deep into the earth. The inner walls were covered with vibrant paintings depicting his divine birth, his military victories, his communion with the gods. Even in the darkest chambers, light was part of the design. The temple was a marvel of engineering and astronomy, precisely aligned so that twice a year, anniversary of his birth, anniversary of his coronation, the rays of the rising sun would penetrate the long hall. The light would travel over 200 feet into the mountain to illuminate the statues of the gods and Ramses in the innermost sanctuary. This was not just building, it was a statement. Ramses built to be seen. He built to awe and intimidate. He built to prove his divinity and to ensure that his image and his name would be forever remembered. His building fever transformed the landscape of Egypt. He added to the great temples of Karnak, Luxor, erecting massive pylons, courtyards, obelisks that dwarfed all who stood before them. Behind the grand facade of the divine king and mighty warrior was a man, head of a large, complex royal household. In the great palace, Ramses was surrounded by his extensive family. He had many wives. His great royal wife, Nefertari, held a special place, often shown by his side in statues and temple reliefs. He was father to a vast number of children, dozens of sons and daughters filling the palace halls with life. He sat with them at lavish banquets, long tables laden with freshly baked bread, roasted fish from the Nile, sweet dates, ripe figs. The court was sensory richness and refined ceremony. Musicians played gentle melodies on harps and on flutes. Dancers moved in slow, elegant steps, performing stories of gods and heroes. The court wore fine pleated linen and intricate jewelry of gold, lapis lazuli, carnelian. Learned priests consulted the king. High officials handled administration. Ramses taught his sons the arts of war and of governance. Amid pomp, he shared intimate moments, walking hand in hand with a child in palace gardens, pointing at a lotus on the pond. He spoke softly to Queen Nefertari. Their bond shone in the tomb he built for her in the Valley of the Queens. These quiet scenes paint a fuller picture of the man behind the crown. The public world and the private world were deeply intertwined. The family's health reflected the nation's health. Royal ceremonies like the birth of a prince and marriage alliances were celebrated with festivals and offerings. In ancient Egypt, religion was not a part of life. It was the very center of existence, and the pharaoh was its living heart. In the cool, shadowy interiors of the tall temples, priests in immaculate white linen robes performed their daily rituals. They burned fragrant incense in golden censers. Smoke carried prayers up to the heavens. They chanted sacred texts and played music on sistrums, drums, flutes, sounds to please the gods and keep Ma'at. At the core of these rituals was the king. Priests led the pharaoh into the inner sanctum, the Holy of Holies, where the god's statue resided and ordinary people could never enter. The pharaoh was the bridge between humanity and the divine. He was chief priest and sole intermediary for the people. Common folk brought offerings of grain, beer, linens to the temple gates. The king alone symbolically presented them to the gods within. Ramses took this role with utmost seriousness. He commissioned thousands of statues and prayers for the gods, Amun-Ra, Ptah, Ra. To be pharaoh was to be a living sign of divine power on earth. His authority came from this sacred connection. People looked to him for laws and protection, for the annual flooding of the Nile, for the fertility of their fields, and for safety from chaos and darkness. His building program was an act of continuous worship. Each temple was a new home for a god, each obelisk a petrified ray of sunlight, each statue a vessel for divine energy. Through these acts, Ramses reinforced his sacred contract with the gods. Rituals remained elaborate and deeply symbolic. During great festivals, a god's statue was carried out in a sacred bark, letting the people witness its presence. Ramses led these processions, his divinity on display. He took part in the Hebsed festival, a jubilee to ritually rejuvenate the king after 30 years, ensuring he could maintain cosmic order. Through every prayer, every offering, every stone laid, Ramses fulfilled his duty, holding the world of men and the gods in harmonious balance. Time, the one force that even a pharaoh cannot command, passed relentlessly. Ramses the Great grew old. His powerful face became lined with the wisdom and weariness of his long reign. His dark hair thinned and turned white. He had ruled Egypt for an astonishing 67 years, outliving many of his own children and grandchildren. He had seen the sun rise and set over the Nile Valley more times than almost any man alive. He felt the immense weight of his years, the memories of battles fought, treaties signed, temples raised. In his later years, he made peace with his old enemies, the Hittites, signing the world's first known peace treaty. He looked upon the colossal temples and statues he had scattered across the land and felt a deep sense of pride and accomplishment. Like all kings before him, he had long prepared for his passage into the afterlife. His tomb in the Valley of the Kings, a deep and wonderfully decorated passageway into the underworld, stood ready. When the great king finally died, his body was taken by the priests to a sacred chamber, the House of Purification. There they performed the intricate 70-day ritual of mummification. They carefully wrapped his body in hundreds of yards of fine linen, placing protective amulets and sacred oils between the layers. They spoke ancient prayers and incantations to the gods of the underworld, preparing his soul for the trials it would face. His magnificent tomb was filled with all the goods he would need for a comfortable afterlife: furniture, food, chariots, and golden treasures. Statues of gods and guardians stood silent watch in the painted chambers. The king's mummy would now sleep in the silent, dark hills of Thebes. Ramses's stonework stood tall against the centuries. His temples and statues became timeless landmarks, watching over the Nile as dynasties rose and fell.